Welcome to the class. Let us discuss Weber's position on democracy and colonialism. Because as you must be remembering, we have been discussing these two topics in detail, especially colonialism and democracy with respect to, at least with respect to Karl Marx and Emil Durkheim in detail. Because these two are extremely important concerns, extremely important theoretical concerns for all of us, even today, even in the contemporary world. So it is extremely important for us to understand how these founding fathers of sociology understood these two core themes of democracy and colonialism. And especially colonialism assumes a significant position because all these scholars whom we are discussing, they really lived during the heights of colonialism, and they were the beneficiaries of colonialism, and they lived in a place that had colonized the rest of the world. So it is extremely important for us to understand how did these people, how did these stalwarts look at the process of colonization, and whether they were critical of that, or whether they took it for granted, were they sympathetic to that, or they did not really look at it to critically see. All these points are extremely important. So let us begin with Weberian understanding or Weberian position on democracy. We can say that Weber is a theorist of democracy. Of course, he looked into a number of other aspects, but he had quite a lot of substantive things to talk about democracy. He was not like, say, Karl Marx, who are extremely skeptical of a political democracy without the emergence of a social, a social democracy. So Weber has a lot of interesting things to say about democracy. So for Weber, the nation state is tied to bureaucratic domination and control. Okay, this is something that we already discussed. For Weber, bureaucratization is nothing but it's a rationalization of the modern times, and then Weber is very emphatic in arguing that you can't have a modern society without rationalization. So when you understand the processes that are taking place across various spheres of modern society, whether it is state or political systems or church or education system or every important spheres, we will see that this bureaucratization has taken place. Weber argues that it is an unavoidable. Okay, it's an unavoidable process. And Weber very emphatically argues that this process of bureaucratization is very closely connected with the emergence and functioning of nation state. So for Weber, the nation state is tied to the bureaucratic domination and control. So the state uses a bureaucratic apparatus for domination and control. And this is extremely important because we are coming to some very important definition of Max Weber on nation state. So he identifies, or he characterizes nation state as the state is based on the legitimate use of force over a delimited territory. For governments are ultimately founded on the control and use of violence. And this is an extremely important one. Usually we understand nation state as the powerful entity which has a sovereignty over a given territory. Okay, that's how we understand. That is why that's how we understand the sovereignty of a nation state. When you say that a particular nation state, for example, India is a sovereign republic, it means that India has absolute authority over its territory. And we know that this claim is not many times accepted by others. There could be quite a lot of contestations regarding where exactly is the boundary. But generally, we understand that a nation state has complete authority, complete sovereignty over its territory. But more interestingly, more importantly, Weber argues that nation state has the ability to use legitimate use of force over a delimited territory. Okay, for governments are ultimately founded on the control and use of violence. So state alone has the ability to use legitimate form of violence. That is why every state has specialized agencies for unleashing violence. We can think about it as all kind of armed forces, including police to that of military, okay, all specialized commando forces. All these are groups who are trained to kill or trained to inflict violence on somebody. So inflicting violence on whom is a very, very interesting question. So military is trained to unleash violence on the external enemy, whereas the police is trained to unleash violence or use violence on its own subjects, on its own citizens. So by the very definition that a particular political system is a nation state, it means that it has the ability to unleash violence, and we know that nation state alone has the right to legitimately take out somebody's life. That is why capital punishment, capital punishment is a legitimate thing. Even suicides in many countries, suicides is punishable, or attempt to suicide is punishable. You don't have the right to take away your own life. You are not the owner of your own life. You can't take away your life. The state is the owner of that. So that is why the capital punishment, killing somebody by hanging or shooting, is accepted as a legitimate form of providing punishment in many societies. So all politicians must be willing to use state-sanctioned violence in order to responsibly carry out their duties. So Weber is very clear that the responsibility of nation state is basically to control and use of violence over its delimited territory, over the subjects, over its own people. And without that, a nation state cannot exist. So democracy and bureaucracy are inseparable, as democratic political representation and equality demand administrative and judicial provisions to prevent privilege. So democracy and bureaucracy are inseparable, as democratic political representations and equality demand administrative and judicial provisions to prevent privilege. So it's an extremely, again, an ideal typical argument that in a modern democratic system you need to have the democracy and bureaucracy in its complete ethical sense, because he says that in order to prevent privilege, because in every society there would be sections of people who are traditionally privileged, and this privilege can come from various sources. I hope you discuss our discussion about Weber and Marx. In fact, a kind of a debate between Weber and Marx about what are the sources of stratification. So please keep those discussions in mind when we come about it. So in order to prevent privilege, in order to ensure that a traditionally powerful or a newly powerful group does not give any regard to existing other forms of authority, it doesn't really bring in personal elements, it doesn't bring in traditional elements. It's supposed to be extremely, it is supposed to be solely focused on the rational things. So that is why Weber argues that a very impersonal, extremely powerful, impartial, impersonal bureaucratic system is very much important for a vibrant democracy to thrive. Weber views modern politics as invariably tied to rationalization. In democracies, the bureaucratization of political parties is the rule. Now, he has very interesting analysis about political parties, and he argues that there is a bureaucratization, a process of bureaucratization of the political parties as well. Often politicians offer patronage to their supporters, which encourage a party machinery. Parties demand a party organization to attain and maintain power. Weber views politics as giving leaders a feeling of power over others and of influencing historically significant events. And he develops a characteristically cynical view of the political life. Weber has very extensive analysis about the political parties, and we also know that how political parties are supposed to function, whether parties with say very strong ideological core, or parties with very strong appeal to certain say primordial affinities, especially in India. You know that certain parties appeal on the basis of religious affiliation, certain parties appeal on the basis of linguistic affiliation, certain other parties appeal on the basis of caste affiliation, certain other parties appeal on certain kind of abstract ideas like equality or other ideas, or socialism or other ideas. But whatever be the ideas, politicians offer patronage to their supporters, and that is how this everyday democracy works. Everyday democracy works because the politicians are supposed to do offer patronage to their supporters, which encourage a party machinery. And parties demand a party organization to attain and maintain power. We know the kind of very interesting dynamics between the ruling party and the government itself. Okay, the prime minister or the chief minister of every country will also be a face of the party, and his or her government is in fact supposed to reflect the policies of her party. So there's a very thin line that separates the party and the government. Once the party leader assumes, he or she takes the oath and assumes the office of a prime minister or chief minister, he or she is supposed to be completely devoid, completely divorced from the party agenda, and supposed to look at everybody equally without favor and fear. That is the important word or important sentence in the oath. But in general, or in our everyday practices, we understand that most of these people who assume power will be also partial to their own political parties. They will be committed to implement the ideologies of their parties. So Weber views politics as giving leaders a feeling of power over others and of influencing historically significant events. And he develops a characteristically cynical view of political life. Because why the cynical view? Because he thinks that a completely typical bureaucratized process is not happening in the current democracy, because a host of other considerations including favoritism, likeness for certain tradition, giving privilege to certain groups, all these things seep in. For Weber, a good politician passionately believes in her cause. Yet a good politician must balance this passion with a strong sense of responsibility and an understanding of proportion. And this is what I was talking about. They have to have a kind of a passionate belief in her cause, and this cause is mostly defined or influenced by a very strong ideological position, and this will put enormous pressure on the leader to strike a balance between the commitment to this particular cause and a host of other other causes, maybe contradictory causes, or other people who may not be a part of this cause. So it's very important that the leader develops sensitivity to understand these situations. An irresponsible politician appeals to voters' emotions and often become vain in her search for power. She lacks objectivity, becoming more concerned with the impressions and effects of her actions than with causes. A very important argument. An irresponsible politician, and we have a lot of such figures in history, and even now there are a lot of interesting discussions and debates talking about the emergence of populist leaders. Okay? A new trend maybe for the last 10 or 15 years across the globe. A new crop of populist leaders are supposedly emerging across the globe, including US and Brazil and Turkey and a host of other places, where they are seen as appealing to the voters' emotions rather than upholding more lofty ideals and other things. And she lacks objectivity. Such leaders who can ignite very strong passions of the people, because we know that igniting passion is something important, but igniting passion also can be counterproductive, because you are igniting the passions of the people, and most of the time these passions will be always directed against an other, and if the passions are built around questions of identities are always built against the other. Okay, without an other you don't have an identity. Okay? So if you think that a particular nation is for a particular group of people, and if you want to communicate that with the people, or if you want to make use of encash, if you want to make use of exploit that sense, that kind of sentiment that is already dormant among the people, then what you are doing, you are igniting the kind of a passion of the people, and that can lead to quite a lot of violence. It can lead to quite a lot of turmoils and other things. So she lacks objectivity, becoming more concerned with the impressions and effects of her actions rather than with the causes. Though he believes that democracies tend to promote demagogues, he views parliament as a way to control the political leaders' power by establishing legal safeguards and determining peaceful means of political succession. So here he reposes enormous faith on the ability of parliament, because we know that parliament is a conglomeration of so many different people representing different constituencies. And this constituency, I am not talking about the mere physical constituencies or geographical constituencies. These people, these parliamentarians, they represent different sections of people. They represent different group of people with diverse experiences, diverse historical background, diverse agendas, diverse opinion. So this parliament is supposed to be a place where these people coming from so many different backgrounds engage in discussions and debates and then reach a kind of a consensus. And this consensus is supposed to be is what is supposed to emerge as a law from a particular parliament. So Weber had enormous faith on the ability of the parliament to reflect these diversities of a society, and also the ability to checkmate a leader, a demagogue who wants to overrule everything. And a means of political parliament is a training ground for leaders who learn the politics of compromise and responsibility. But again, we know that a host of contemporary examples paint a rather different picture. We have a lot of examples of how leaders really make parliament really ineffective. Leaders can simply overrule the parliament, especially if they have huge majority. Okay, so there are arguments that in many countries, which were once respected for the vibrancy of their democracy, have been made hollow from inside. You have all the structures of democracy look intact, but it has been hollowed out. It has been jeopardized from within. The very spirit of democracy has been very seriously seriously undermined from within by these political parties and leaders. So we have to say that the excessive optimism that Weber places on parliament could be problematic. Then he states that the democracy and freedom are in fact only possible if they are supported by the permanent determined will of a nation not to be governed like a flock of sheep. A strong democratic nation is based on informed popular sovereignty. A very, very important point. That the democracy and freedom are in fact only possible if they are supported by the permanent determined will of a nation. Okay? And will of a nation, what does the nation want, and who knows that? Who really represents the nation? Who really represents the people? Okay? Do our representatives, the elected representatives, actually represent the people, or do they represent some more vested interest? These are some of the very, very profound questions. Very profound questions, starting from Aristotle, a host of people, and being again Karl Marx asked some of the very pertinent questions. So Weber argues that people must become capable of making good, rational, informed decisions if any form of popular sovereignty is to succeed. Okay, so he would argue that democracy will thrive, or democracy in its actual sense of the meaning will survive, will exist only if the people are able to act rational choices. But again, we know that it's not an easy task. The candidates who are fielded by political parties, there are a host of reports and news reports and studies which talk about a very, very shady background of many of our own candidates, or the people who stand in elections in India. Okay, people who have been charge sheeted, people who have been accused of criminal cases, or for all kind of violences and others. So there is a huge disparity between what is expected of a democracy and what really happens. Weber ties the capacity to act in a politically mature manner to ethics, for he sees the importance of leaders as well as citizens developing qualities of judgment and capacity to apprise historical events and political problems. So he centers around this whole issue of ethics and believing that human beings, ordinary citizens and their representatives will be able to make use of the ethics so that the whims and fancies of a particular leader will not come into play. The major achievement of democracy, such as constitution and a belief in human rights, depend on cultivating a common capacity to rule. Their political and social institutions must teach a democratic people how to exercise sober judgment. And Weber was a very important advocate of liberalism. He was an important advocate of rights of the people, individualism. So he argued very vehemently that you need to have a set of ideas and ethics that are oriented towards these liberal ideas of they have to have a constitutions and belief in human rights depend on cultivating a common capacity to rule. Their political and social institutions must teach a democratic people how to exercise sober judgment. Now to give in, not how to give in for passion, not how to give in for popular sentiments, okay, but to uphold some of the important ideals and important values and then govern accordingly. For Weber, social sciences such as economics or sociology should be concerned above all else with the quality of the human being reared under those economic and social conditions of existence. And this is a I personally found it as a very fascinating argument. He says that social sciences especially must be concerned above all else with the quality of human beings reared under those economic and social conditions of existence. So for Weber, the prime subject matter of these two disciplines at least is to be constantly vigilant about the quality of human beings who are reared in those particular contexts. Okay? And it is not that economics and sociology are so what is he talking about here now? Weber is, as far as I understand, Weber is completely against a utilitarian use or utilitarian understanding of this discipline. He believes that these disciplines or by teaching these disciplines or by learning this discipline, you are simply imparting certain skills so that the person can be employed and then he or she can get away with their life. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about teaching these subjects, or the ability of these subjects is to develop very important critical facilities, to encourage critical thinking, always be sensitive, always be critical of the current situation, and on the basis of certain ethical positions, so on the basis of certain theoretical positions. And this ability to have a critical engagement with an ethical position is what Weber expects from these two important disciplines. And it's something very important that we need to keep in mind, especially in this kind of very difficult situations where social sciences are always looked down upon, or social sciences are seen as unwanted or unnecessary. Okay, people like Weber or almost any philosophers worth the salt will always say that these disciplines are extremely important for a critical consciousness, for the emergence of a population who is quite sensitive to their own living situations. So next theme, let us see how Weber looked at colonialism. What was his position on colonialism? Because Weber lived through the peaks of colonialism. He was a German. Germany was a colonial country, and unlike Karl Marx, who wrote significantly about colonial societies, Weber had access to far better type of material, better resources to evaluate colonialism and then see it. So Weber was sometimes guilty of an Orientalist perspective, as he sometimes evaluated non-Western societies in terms of the Western model. And I hope you are familiar with this term, Orientalism or Orientalist position, a term that was used to indicate the study of the East. The Occident was considered to be the West. So the entire forms of knowledge, the study of history, study of philosophy, study of philology, study of language, study of ethics, study of archaeology, the whole body of knowledge that was developed in the West which studied the East is understood by this term Orientalism or study of the East. It's a very broad category which included sinology, which includes Indology. Indology is the study of India. Okay, so this whole huge body of knowledge that was created in the West, okay, but about the study of the East was the conventional understanding of this term Orientalism. But this particular term was given a very interesting twist or interesting makeover by this very important scholar Edward Said through his book called as Orientalism, in which he explains why this knowledge production is a construct by the West, okay, in order to get a kind of a specific image for himself. Okay, and he very beautifully, very elegantly explains the kind of a connection between knowledge and power. Okay, so no knowledge is innocent, no knowledge is neutral. Okay, that there is a very strong connection between this, very strong interplay between power and knowledge. He argues that the Westerners were in a position to create such a knowledge because of colonialism and other things. So most of the knowledge that was created by the West, okay, about the East was also the creation of a particular kind of a power equation. Okay, so these scholars would argue that Weber also was one among them. Weber also was guilty of an Orientalist bias, as he sometimes evaluated non-Western societies in terms of Western model. So for all these people, West is the place of modernity, it is a place of progress, it is a place of secularism, it is a place of empowerment, it is a place of rationality, and the rest of the West, the rest of the world is a place which has all the negative meanings of all these qualities that we mentioned. The rest of the world, especially the Orient, it is religious, it is not secular, it is primitive, it is superstitious, it is ignorant, okay, it is irrational. So you see a set of binaries. On the one hand, a host of binaries are used to indicate the West, and on the other hand, its opposites are used to indicate the East. And Weber also fell into the same trend, because that was the time when looking at the world through these eyes was seen as the most normal and ordinary thing to do. So Weber sometimes collapsed irrationality and non-modern people into one category, and there's no wonder. We made that reference many times. For him, this Western rationality, the kind of a peculiar rationality, he said just it is so peculiar that it emerged only in the West, only during this particular time, and it did not emerge anywhere else in the world. It did not emerge even in Europe before the emergence of modernity. Very problematic, extremely problematic claim. So he has a strong sense of the ways that irrationality could influence seemingly rational process, as in his studies of religious asceticism and the importance of guilt in religious belief system. So we also mentioned, I hope you remember, when he talks about Islam, when he talks about Hinduism, when he talks about Confucianism, he elaborates why that none of these religions actually gave birth to a spirit of capitalism. And his argument is very clear, because these societies were always otherworldly. They were preoccupied with the question of the other world. Okay, they were always seeped into a lot of unfounded, irrational, superstitious beliefs like, say, karma, dharma, fate, and a host of other things. Okay, it did not have the drive to look into the present world and to actively change it. And he said that only Judaism, and especially in reformist Christianity, that it had that particular kind of a spark. The very first sentence of Protestant ethics reads, "A product of modern European civilization, studying any problem of universal history, is bound to ask himself to what combination of circumstances that the fact should be attributed that in Western civilization and in Western civilization only, cultural phenomena have appeared, which, as we like to think, lie in a line of development having universal significance and values." So this is very first sentence in Protestant ethics. So he is asking, okay, and why that in Western civilization, and why Western civilization only, the kind of a cultural phenomenon have appeared lie in a line of development having universal significance and value. So why that only West was able to come up with cultural phenomena and values of universal significance? Why that they were able to come up with this kind of ideas of rationality, human rights, and a host of other things? Why that the rest of the world did not do that? It's a very important question that Weber asked, just like any other Eurocentric European scholars must have asked during that particular time. You know that Marx shares the similar idea. Marx thinks that the non-Westerners cannot write history; their history must be written. Okay, and the similar idea is shared by Weber as well. And this kind of thinking that really dominated the academic sphere for several decades is now being very actively, questioned through a series of studies, which usually come under the category of decolonial studies. Okay, decolonial studies, where we try to understand how these claims have really given birth to certain conceptual as well as theoretical categories, which really give you a very distorted picture about society. And here, just think about it. Even Weber doesn't have anything to talk about the influence of colonial exploitation. Okay, he doesn't say anything much about why that this whole colonial enterprise has really pauperized. Okay, it has really decimated a vast number of societies across the world, including Latin America, including Africa, including Asia. The devastating effects of colonization, okay, is never addressed or never even acknowledged by most of these people. So they think that there was some essentially cultural elements emerge in Europe because of some reasons, and the rest of the world did not produce that. A very, very problematic, extremely problematic position, which again did not allow them to look at this process of colonial imperialism, the slave trade, the kind of economic exploitation in an objective manner. He says the East lacks history, beliefs, and the likes which allow Western capitalism to flourish. Despite Weber's critical comments about rationalization, he largely understands non-Western cultures through its categories. They have little capacity for agency. So Weber talks about rationality. He also says that there are other kind of rationality, but when it comes to his evaluation, he uses only the kind of rationality that he is familiar with, the Western rationality, and on the basis of that he evaluates and scales up, and he evaluates other civilizations and even pronounces a kind of a judgment. So while Weber ties religious traditions to political and economic factors, he does not discuss colonialism in any depth, as I mentioned. Okay, he studied all these Eastern religions in detail, Confucianism, Islam, Hinduism, but he hardly discusses colonialism as a very important function, process. Indeed, Weber supported an expansionist, imperialist German state throughout his life. And we know that what does it mean to be expansionist, what does it mean to be imperialist? Imperialism, either it could be through direct dominance or through dominance through trade or through political patronage, but it's always about dominance. Okay? It's always about having scant interest about the people who are below you. Okay? It's an assumption that you have the inherent right to rule over somebody, and Weber did not have any issue with that. Rather than positioning rationalization as some inevitable universal process, sometimes Weber seems to argue that rationalization has no singular logic, that it is bound up with particular groups, social forces, and social relations that are local and historically specific. So sometimes he brings in more nuances in his argument about rationalization. Thus, rationalization means different thing to different cultures, and it may be able to be reversed or stopped in some instances. So rationalization means different things in different cultures, and it may be able to be reversed or stopped in some instances. So he brings in some certain nuances about rationalization. He thinks that it can appear in different forms in different society, but he is not free from that overall Eurocentric position. So Weber shows that Western capitalism and its associated religious traditions are one form of civilization among many others. Further, Weber sees Western rationality as infused with irrational and destructive elements, culminating in a bureaucratized world without meaning. And he develops this argument, especially when he develops the kind of a critical position of bureaucracy, that it can be dehumanizing, it can be insensitive, it can be corrupt, it can lead to nepotism, a host of others. But generally, he understands this rationalism as a unique product of European historical context, and then and which he very clearly says that it is absent in the rest of the societies. Okay, so that is our brief discussion on Weber's position on democracy and colonialism, and I hope that you will find these discussions important and interesting, because it provides us with some opportunity to understand how a person like Weber with so much of high stature really looked at these very key themes. So let us stop here, and we will conclude this session, discussions on Weber with the next class, where we have a critical analysis of Weber's contributions. Okay, so thank you.